All right, and we're
Everybody,
live.
and welcome today. We're so excited to have you here. We're going to give everybody just a couple of minutes here to get kicked off, to get settled in, to get into the waiting room. We have a very exciting conversation coming up with our awesome partners, Cyberhill. Today, we'll be talking about governance for AI, making your strategy safe, scalable, and successful. We have an incredible powerhouse team together with some really great leading experts. It's going to be a wonderful conversation. As we're giving everybody a couple of minutes here to get logged in, figured we'd ask our panelists, guys, what do you got going this summer? It's 4th of July is coming up. The summer's coming up, tends to be a vacation time. Any fun plans or special family traditions that you do around this time?
I
Amy?
just saw Kenny Chesney at the Sphere.
Ooh,
Cool.
So I would highly recommend the Sphere in Vegas. So if anybody has any plans or, wants a side trip, it's epic, amazing.
Wow.
I've heard
Yeah.
the same thing. Sounds great.
Yeah.
is it weird having a solo performer in the Sphere? The, I was hoping to have caught you too when they were at the Sphere and just couldn't make it out. But like, did it work? Just having like, I know he has a band, but did it
Yeah,
work?
as a band, no, it did. I mean, so the graphics were unbelievable. It starts off where you're totally submersed, you're underwater going through like a wreck ship and sharks are swimming around you, above you. It's insane. And then you come above the water and he's playing in the sphere and then it launches you into the sphere. Like it just the graphics, every single song was, all senses on overload.
It's really cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Very, very cool.
That's a great way to go spend. And also, I'm assuming that's inside and probably much cooler than you want to be in.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
Inside with AC, yes.
Oh.
yes. Speaking of, if you're here, tell us in the chat where you're dialing in from. We're super excited to have you here, but we'd love to know where in the world you're joining us from. So with that, I'm going to go ahead. It looks like we've got a good group here. I'm going to go ahead and kick off. Before I kick it over to Amy to start the conversation, I just want to go through a few quick housekeeping items. First, you will be receiving a copy of this on demand. So keep an eye out for an email in the next day or two that'll have the link to watch this on demand, as well as some additional resources and ways to connect with our team. Two, please use the Q&A as well as the chat to engage. We open this up. We encourage you all to have wonderful conversations in there. If you have a question for our panel, please do drop that in the Q&A. We will be doing a live Q&A at the end. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and kick it over to Amy to get us started. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Steph. Appreciate
Thanks,
it.
Steph.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to our data.world and Cyberhill Governance for AI discussion today. I don't think that was a title of words I would have said 5 years ago or even imagined myself saying 5 years ago, but welcome to this discussion. Today, we're going to discuss the why, the trends, and the how for making your governance strategy safe, scalable, and successful. I want to get through a few housekeeping intros, and then we're going to dive right in. By quick company intros, data.world is a leading data catalog and data governance platform. We were founded and built on a knowledge graph directly suited for enterprise and highly regulated environment adoption. And in full transparency, I need to say this, data.world is currently being acquired by ServiceNow. ServiceNow is excited to welcome data.world as together we'll provide enterprise-grade data discovery, understanding, automation, and governance for customers eager to confidently harness their data and AI with context, transparency, and most importantly, trust. Our acquisition is expected to close mid-summer, but please note that our following discussion is a production of solely data.world and Cyberhill. Cyberhill Partners is a professional services firm that delivers secure, scalable, and smart software solutions through expert implementation services in cybersecurity, cloud, AI, and data analytics. With over 800 successful enterprise engagements and trusted partnerships across the Department of Defense and intelligence community, Cyberhill helps enterprises, mid-size, and government organizations operationalize their data, strengthen their cybersecurity posture, and accelerate their digital transformation. I myself am Amy Mungo. I'm the Global Vice President of Partnerships and Channel here at data.world. I'm joined by Ryan Cush, our CRO at data.world, Rob Bowler, partner at Cyberhill, and also Jake McAndrew, also partner at Cyberhill. Together, we bring decades of experience across enterprise technology, cybersecurity, SaaS, and a healthy dose of strategy consulting. Okay, our intros are cleared. So let's talk about you, our audience, what you're going to hear and what you can expect today. And hopefully we surpass all of your expectation. For our data leaders out there, today we're going to talk through topics such as how do you explain to your executive why your sophisticated LLM can't reliably answer basic business questions about your own data? And what can we do to solve against that? What governance frameworks ensure your AI understands your business context, not just your database structure? And for business leaders out there with us today, I ask you this question. If your AI system is only 16 to 20% accurate on enterprise questions, how much would you trust it with high-level strategic decisions? And or what's the cost of AI hallucinations in your business critical processes? We look forward to your questions. Please note that we're time boxing our discussion, followed by live audience Q&A. And then I've asked each of our panelists to leave us with 2 key takeaways from our discussion today. So we're going to kick off. And we're going to kick off kind of like at a granular level, talking about the imperative role that ontology plays with governance and AI. So as we all know, data and AI governance ensures the transparency, the accountability, and the safety in our AI applications. As our enterprises scale their initiatives, ungoverned models can lead to biased outcomes, lack of traceability, and as we all know, several compliance risks. But we have to get effective at our governance, especially when powered by metadata and knowledge graph. This creates a foundation of trust, essential for both internal teams and our external stakeholders. So Rob, start us off at the beginning, if you will. What is ontology and what is ontology within AI? And then
So
go ahead. Yeah.
Yep. So thanks, Amy. So ontology is really a structured framework, but it's domain specific, right? So if you say stock means something in the financial markets, it means something else in retail and SKU, it means something completely different in agriculture, right? So giving the AI kind of the semantics in a structured framework is imperative. The structured framework, what we mean by that is it's really relating objects, nodes, if you will, with other objects. So an airline industry, their airlines, their airports, their flights. And then when you think about an ontology, it's really like a tree. So if you dig into the airline, you'll find that the airline, has Boeing 747s, it has, MD-80s, it's got all these different planes, all these different years, et cetera. But you show the relationships between those. United Airlines owns 50 747s, right? So owning is part of that relationship. And so as these trees grow and the branches branch off, you allow the AI to get smarter, to provide it with insights. And again, it's domain specific. So it's really important to create an ontology for an organization because, like I said, there's semantics involved, natural language processing, et cetera. There are all these things that come into play, and it makes your AI up to 40% more effective. The last thing I'll say is it's shocking to us that when we talk to so many large companies, and several a week, right, is just how ontology is not being utilized. And there's a super valuable reason why you want to use ontology in certain industries, and I'll get to that later maybe. But really, it's shocking when we talk to these companies. It's like, well, who built your ontology? How are you maintaining it? And they're like, oh yeah, well no, we've been using AI for 2 or 3 years. We're great. Look, okay, well, what are you doing with your ontology? No, our AI is great. It works fine. And then, I'm like, well, okay, but how did you build your ontology? What's an ontology? And these are major companies, $20 billion companies that are deploying AI, and they really aren't familiar with it, and they don't make use of it. And again, it's super impactful. It's required in my view. And as we move to agentic AI, it's absolutely necessary. So, the future of it relies on it, and then it becomes your intellectual property. You can create an ontology that really is your domain specific, company specific, that allows your company to perform at the highest level.
Mhm.
Yeah,
And
I
go
was
ahead.
just going to add, I think one of the things that we see too, once we dig in with customers, is these are living and breathing assets for a business, right? Building a practice around how do you initially develop an ontology, but then manage it, right? As your business grows and scales and changes, right? This ontology is really the translation between all of your data and the business, right? And it needs to be uh, fed and cared for just like any other part of the business would. So outside of just the initial development and having an ontology to start, which is a massive step for most companies that we're working with, we'll probably dig in a little bit later today too around just kind of culture and the people problem in AI, but really making sure that we're managing that ontology over the life cycle of the business is extremely important and something that we really try and push with customers.
Yeah, and one thing that I didn't add in there is that the ontology really is the way for human beings to communicate with AI, with the machines. It's the bridge. It puts human knowledge and understanding into a framework that is digestible by AI. So I kind of skipped over that framework and just used that word, a structured framework, but that's really what it is. And it allows then the AI to understand how humans think.
Yeah, both human readable and machine readable. It's funny, we've been talking about knowledge graphs I've been at data.world for 7 years. And for the first, 5 or 6 of those years, you'd say the word ontology and people thought you were talking about cancer. They had no idea what that meant. And now, so we actually sort of shied away from it because the industry wasn't there, but you really are seeing this explosion now. I'm curious, in the companies that you all talk to, do you see any correlations with the companies that are already more advanced in understanding ontologies versus the ones that are not? Are you seeing like certain industries or other predictors of that?
No, that's a great question. Not really predictors, and it's kind of a hodgepodge of it. So what I mean by that is we might talk with a financial services firm that's pretty advanced, maybe even talking about using quantum, right? And then we might talk to a pharma who is way advanced, and another one that's not. But they're both the same size. They're multi-billion global businesses. So it's a hodgepodge of it. But like I said, it's for us, it's somewhat of an education, and I'd say probably 90% of the companies we speak with, and maybe that's why they're coming to us, right? So maybe that number is skewed. But a large percentage of those companies just don't even understand really what an ontology is or the benefits of it.
Right. And to take a deeper dive on what an ontology is, I just actually noticed there's a question that just hit the chat. Uh-oh, where'd it go? There it is. And it was a great question. I know we're doing Q&A, but since we're defining ontology, I want to pull it forward right now. What does the ideal domain specific ontology consist of? So maybe if we could give a specific example, is it the metadata, a data dictionary, and what level of semantics are best to aim for? So Rob, Ryan, Jake, if you want to pick a specific example and opine on that for a couple minutes, I think that'd be great for our audience.
I think of it just at the highest level. I think of it in terms of three things: concepts, attributes, and relationships. So what are the business concepts that exist? So like Rob gave the great example of stock, which has a totally different, meaning depending on what industry you're in. So for your industry, what are the concepts that exist, right? Customers and products and orders and suppliers. And then the attributes, what are the attributes of those concepts? And then the relationships between those concepts. So you have nouns and verbs. The verbs are connecting these things together, and that way, any human that understands your domain looks at it and says, "Oh yeah, that totally makes sense." The way these nouns and verbs fit together, and then it just so happens that's also machine readable, and so the LLMs can also understand that just as well as the humans.
Totally. Yeah, I think that metadata level is the perfect target, right? To make sure that you're really putting the pieces together. We're gonna get into it, I'm sure a little bit later, kind of the differences between ontology and a knowledge graph itself and the actual, I think of the ontology as the over like the scaffolding, the structure, right, of those concepts, and the graph is the actual implementation of those things on your data, right? How do you How do you get your data into that ontology, right? It's via the graph. So yeah, I think thinking about it at a very high level, Ryan, you hit it. I thought you hit that perfectly, right? That metadata level will, especially if you're starting, is a great target for you to shoot for, to really get a lot of value out of a lot of the AI stuff that you're building.
Yeah, and I typically tell clients, try to explain that maybe in simplistic terms of think about a spreadsheet, right? So companies are running their LLMs over the data, what's in the spreadsheet. But the important things are the titles of the rows and the columns, the title of the tab, the title of the report, right? That's your metadata. And so the metadata informs better decisions. The data is great, right? And that's what it'll work on. But you can consume the metadata via pointers and connectors as opposed to ingesting in another data lake and things of that nature. The other really important thing is you can create an ontology. So as we speak about ontology, I hope the audience understands that you can create an ontology overnight. Like it's not hard to create it. The difficulty is the domain specific and refining it. And you can refine it for the rest of your life. I mean, it can be kind of a long project to continually refine it. New things come on, different types of partners, different types of channels appear. So it's the refining of it and maintaining of the ontology that will take some effort, but it's not overwhelming at all. And creating the ontology with a lot of great tools like data.world is the way to go, right? Because all of a sudden you can create in a rapid fashion something that's going to make your AI 40% more effective, quite literally overnight. And then the refinement, is the thing it's kind of the 80-20 rule, right? You can create it. And then, you're going to spend a lot of the time, 80% of your time on the 20% refinement down the road. So those I think are two very important points to that question.
Also worth noting that there are some industry standard ontologies that already exist out there that you can start with, right? Like FIBO is one for the financial industry that comes up quite often, and different industries have starting point ontologies that can be used. Yeah.
Yep.
SNOMED for healthcare.
Yep. As I say, healthcare has 3 different ontologies that I'm aware of. Now, when you have, I have 2 questions here. I'm going to play person on the street questions today. First of all, if I already have AI initiatives running, but yet I'm just learning the vocabulary of ontologies now, have I failed in my order of operations, or can I go back and build an ontology to make my AI outcomes better? Can you take us through that journey?
Yes.
Yeah. No,
okay.
Yes, that was a short journey. Thank you,
Yes.
Rob.
Yeah, go ahead, Jake.
No, I was going to say the answer is yes, right? Like I think the majority of businesses that we speak to, both on the commercial side and federal agencies, are trying to take advantage of the latest AI capabilities, models, right? And they do a decent job out of the box, right? And you start to get some value in proof of concept or early kind of R&D phases, right? This seems to work. It seems to do what I am expecting. But in order to scale, right, that understanding is critical. I think you can absolutely create those ontologies at any point. The one point, and I think this is a good insight that we've seen too, is a lot of folks may not know what an ontology is or not have one or manage one.
Right.
But a lot of that semantics is sometimes built into tools you're already using, right? There's a lot of commercial products that build their own internal semantic layers for AI to take advantage of the data that you're running, but it's very piecemeal, right? You might have a SaaS product that you buy for a very specific part of your business, and under the hood, without even knowing it, it's built this semantic layer and might have some sort of quote unquote ontology that it creates itself, but it's not something that you're taking advantage of for everything else. You can only use it within the product, right? So I would say that for folks that may be learning about ontologies for the first time, you're not alone. It is a very normal thing, and it's a perfect time to start, right? You can absolutely take advantage of building and maintaining ontologies with existing AI capabilities. You'll immediately see the improvement, and I know, Ryan, you probably have there's a lot of research that's gone into that, but yeah, you can start at any point.
Ryan, will you level set us? So we've heard three big vocabulary terms, and I'm sure our audience has a knowledge of these, but I want to like level set for our conversation going forward. We've just kind of taken the deep dive on ontology. Jake just introduced semantic layer. And Jake also introduced about 4 minutes ago knowledge graph. He said, but we'll get to it. So Ryan, could you give us the kind of like working definitions or like person on the street? Here's why you need to know what semantic layer is and knowledge graph is. And then I want to talk about how they all work together as we chart our way towards governance.
Yeah, so and Jake and Rob, keep me honest here. So I think of semantic layer as just the generic term for something that adds business meaning or codifies or defines business meaning, which in this context is commonly then applied to data and to metadata. A knowledge graph is a specific implementation of a semantic layer, and it's one that is both industry standard, there's industry standard representations of it, and very rich and powerful in how it encodes that semantics. So for example, you could have a semantic layer that just uses things like YAML files, or it's just some way of encoding that, which may be easy to get started with, but isn't as powerful. And so knowledge graphs have been built up over the years and decades to be very powerful and to have standards bodies governing them. And then the ontology is sort of like, as Jake pointed out, is the thing that you're embedding in that semantic layer. It is the business understanding that you're now codifying in that semantic layer.
Okay. Okay. Ryan, do you think you would like to, or I would like you to give an example of maybe one of our data.world clients. Use it in general, anonymous terms, if you will, but how they use knowledge graph today.
Yeah.
I think people learn best by analogy, so I want to ground our audience with an analogy we can all kind of anchor into.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. I would say probably the ones that are using knowledge graphs the most today are the ones that are not just building their data catalog to have a source of reference, but are actually doing actionable things out of it. So you hear this term like active metadata. It's not just a metadata museum, but you're doing things to actually power them. So one of the common use cases that's being used these days is people want to power natural language chat against their data. And in order to do that, the knowledge graph gives you a much more accurate way for the LLMs to give you results to that. So we have customers that are implementing these. Hey, I don't want to have to go do a bunch of reports and analysis. I just want my users, my less technical users especially, to be able to just ask natural language questions and get answers out of their data. Becoming a very popular use case, and people are integrating these into their chatbots. And this ties to some research that our AI lab has done, which is super interesting in kind of proving out why the knowledge graph makes those types of things more accurate. So we published this in late 2023, and then there was an update last year. And this is folks like Juan Cicada, Dean Alamang, and Brian Jacob that published this research. And essentially what they did, they did this as a very controlled academic study. And they said, okay, let's take a corpus of data. They picked property and casualty insurance data, and they mapped this with an industry standard SQL schema. So then use the schema from the OMG property and casualty data model. So you have this standardized schema for SQL, which is how it gets embedded in the relational database. But then they also built a knowledge graph based on an ontology describing the concepts in property and casualty insurance. So the things we talked about, like what are the business concepts, what are the attributes to those, how do those relate to each other? And so they took all this, loaded up some sample data, and then they asked a set of questions. They picked 43 different questions that they posed to an LLM to take a natural language question and try to get an answer out of it. And the LLMs are more forgiving with unstructured data sometimes because they're not necessarily a right answer. But when you're asking questions of structured data, and especially types of questions that people want to run their business off of, you need the right answer. If I ask about sales trends or year over year, or whatever, like I need an accurate answer. Right. So they asked all of these questions, and they divided them up into a 2x2 along two dimensions. One dimension was the complexity of the question itself. So things like how many aggregations and joins and how much math was needed to answer the question. And then the other dimension was the complexity of the schema that was required to answer that question. So they had, questions in each of these 4 different quadrants. Then they would take these questions and they'd have 2 different variations. One variation, they would ask the question of the LLM. They would give the LLM the SQL DDL, so it understood, the relational data model that the data was stored in. And in the other variation, they did the same thing, except they said, here's a knowledge graph that explains the business concepts and the questions that I'm asking you. And they used real life questions. These were things like, hey, tell me all the claims we have by claim number, open date, and close date, or what's the average time to settle a claim, things like that. What they found was the version that used the knowledge graph was 4.2x the accuracy of the version that didn't, that just looked at the SQL alone. So the SQL alone averaged something like 17% accuracy across all these different questions. And on the 2 highest quadrants, the SQL alone, the LLM produced 0% accuracy. None of the questions could it answer accurately.
Oh, wow.
The version that took the knowledge graph as part of it was able to get up to 75 and over 75% accuracy on 3 of the 4 quadrants. And then on the hardest quadrant, so high question, high schema complexity, was able to get 60% accuracy. And this was just a 0 shot, just throw it out there, get an answer. There wasn't any sort of back and forth. So it was just checking that sort of accuracy. So massive improvement in accuracy, and it's because these LLMs natively understand the knowledge graph and the technologies that it's based on, things like RDF and OWL and SMARCL, those types of things.
It's really interesting because we've obviously talked a lot about that, Ryan, with you guys and some of the research behind that. We've actually seen from a customer perspective, they don't even know what their error rate is, right? Unless it's an obvious wrong answer, right? I know exactly the answer I'm expecting and I can see it. A lot of times, these quote unquote enterprise systems that are supposed to be providing all this value, you can't understand, you can't ground outputs from those models in truth anywhere, right? Because there's no way to trace that response, where it got its data from and how it came to its answer. You can't trace it. So it's interesting, right? Like you doing that research, seeing it in real time, like we know what to expect. We can actually see the differences in the output. And I think for a lot of people that are trying to understand, do I need this or not? Sometimes it's really hard to even identify that you're getting the wrong answers, right? Because you have no way to trace things back. So it's really, really interesting.
And I think that's a super important point. In fact, that's one of the key points with ontologies from our perspective is the traceability. So the future is coming where audits will occur on AI and the decisions that were made. If you don't have an ontology, you can't trace it. It's that simple. So where is traceability really important? Defense, healthcare, finance. Why did we make that trade?
Yep.
And I'd really say that it's important in every industry. Where did we source those parts in manufacturing? Why did we do X, Y, and Z and make this decision to open a valve and pipeline? I mean, there are endless examples where traceability for every single industry is paramount. And like I said, whether you like it or not, it's coming. There will be audits and things of that nature, compliance regulations, et cetera, with regard to AI in the future. There already are. They're starting down that path, but you can expect that will be the future. So if you don't have an ontology, you won't be able to satisfy those regulations, requirements, audits.
So true. And even just for everyday use, if I'm going to be making business decisions based on answers I'm getting from a chat and from an LLM, being able to just visually look at it when you're using the knowledge graph, it shows its work because it shows you not in some gobbledygook SQL query that it generated is 100 lines long that got the answer. It shows you in business terms, hey, I looked at this business concept. I filtered by these attributes and these relationships, and this is how I got the answer I just gave you. So as a user, you can eyeball that. And you can say like, yep, I have confidence in that answer, or like, something looks off here.
Yeah.
Which I can imagine is very important for like credit officers at a bank, actuarial. science, right?
Yeah, and where in engineering is and that's a great point, Ryan, and I love that phrase for this is show your work, right? Where in engineering, math, do you not have to show your work, right? If I come up with a formula, a drug, if I come up with an algorithm, I solve a problem, I have to show my work. And the same is true with AI. So that effectively, by using an ontology, AI is showing its work.
hmm hmm And I like to tell some of our highly regulated client industries that you can either choose to dive in and start to govern yourselves and understand your work, your ontologies or semantic layers, or you wait to be governed, which is an audit nightmare.
Yeah, yeah.
So for organizations to be more proactive and they can show their work, I would assume the better off they're going to be when audit and audit trails catch up to what's going on in technology today.
Yeah, there's also and this is kind of a tie-in into governance, is that there's a strong governance aspect there of making sure that when I ask the question of the LLM, is it giving me a complete answer, but is it only letting me have access to data that I should have access to, right?
Right.
And sort of using approved governed definitions. If I ask for order data, it should use the governed approved definition for what is an order, right?
Exactly.
Be
And,
different.
and echoing that, Ryan, I mean, that's also something when we speak with companies, there is virtually no data governance. It's very minimal, right? I mean, it's piece parts of it. But back to that point is, when I'm interfacing with the AI, I need to only get what I'm allowed to see, right? And you can't carve that off if you're not putting in place the foundational components of a data governance engine, right? Context, certain things that go with the AI structure and compliance. But back to our word of the day, ontology. If you don't have an ontology in place, you can't really govern that.
And Ryan, I want to circle back at the end about how do not think you're climbing two mountains at once, data governance and AI governance. I want to get back to kind of how we discussed in our prep. They are so interrelated and actually partners in this. But first of all, I just wanted to zoom out for a second, let everybody's brains take a break. And actually, Jake and I were prepared to actually talk about some trends that we're seeing out there. Like, how Jake, you've prepared some really great trends in this space and how you're seeing clients adopt the trends, question the trends, or consult around them. What is Cyberhill seeing in the field right now?
Data is a real issue. It has been for a while, but I think there's just a microscope on it now, and it's the most apparent it's ever been that most people have a data problem. I think originally a lot of people thought the more data the better, and that's spiraled, and now we're kind of in the place we are today.
Uh-huh.
Down that that scale path, right? I think we've seen a major shift from centralized data ownership and governance to more of a federated model. And what I mean by that is, okay, we've got all this data, and this is several years ago. Now let's get it all in one place so we can have one team in our IT shop or our security office kind of manage all of that data in one centralized place. And over the last several years, especially with the expansion and the delivery of new technologies around data storage, right? From all kinds of data lakes, and you have Databricks and Snowflake and all these different products, is that teams across a large organization, right, have procured and started to use their own data stores for their own purposes, right? And so you might have instances of Databricks and Snowflake and some sort of, on-prem, very closed off, network that you're doing things on. And it's a lot of organizations have lost the visibility into their entire data ecosystem, right? And the governance there is extremely hard because every shop now has to own their own piece of that data. And we've kind of seen a scramble now to try and figure out from an enterprise level, now how do I manage this? Right now, I might have 10 to 15 different teams managing different technologies and different sets of data. No one's working off the same standards. right? We're not calling business terms the same things, right? So now when you want to say, okay, our board or whoever has decided we're going to implement AI, right? It's like, where do we start? It's a foundational problem, right? Fixing that kind of ecosystem and making sure that you're putting people and process and things in place that help govern that federated model now is it's something that we're working with a lot of our customers, especially on the federal side, with is kind of bringing them into this new age of data ownership and stewardship. So,
And data has been an issue forever,
Right.
right? I mean, Mark Twain even has a quote, data is like garbage. You better know what you're going to do with it before you collect it, right? I mean, so it's been around a long time, and with all the proliferation of different solutions out there, Databricks, Snowflake, et cetera, it's grown bigger, right? So Jake's point, I think is 100%. Like before you get too far down the path on AI and the models and all that, make sure you kind of take a good look at your data, clean it, make sure that you have a lot of things in place. But last point on that is ontology can actually pick the metadata off of some of your garbage, your data, and coalesce it together so you don't have to like create a massive data ocean and do that much, right? So you can effectively utilize and leverage an ontology to deal with some of your data issues.
Got it.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons, right? The partnership between Cyberhill and DataWorld has been so successful, right? I think a lot of our customers have been told that you need to centralize your data. You need to pull, you need to either duplicate or move data from one place to another to take advantage of it. And DataWorld's metadata first, kind of leave data where it is today and take advantage of it from a metadata perspective has been a huge value add, right? You can have all those different types of technologies and you can continue to operate the way you do today, but you need to govern it at an enterprise level, right? There needs to be a strategy and kind of architecture at a high level to manage it all. So,
and it's even more urgent with AI because the problems of people arguing in a meeting over reports because they use different definitions across the different groups. Well, that runs at one pace when it's humans doing that. But then you fast forward to when AI agents are doing a lot of things and just the decision velocity increases dramatically. Now it's so much more important that federated view gets pulled into a consolidated model.
And go ahead, Jake.
Nope.
I was just going to say, add on to your point, Ryan, is as you mentioned AI agents, and there's been a lot of talk about kind of the reduction of large enterprise software and the move to maybe more AI agents out there. And I think a really important point is we are in the midst of a shift, and that shift is kind of software as a service to really service as a software. And the impact of that is really going to be felt at the data level, right? Is if you're not kind of squaring away your data, you aren't going to be able to keep up with the kind of movement.
Right.
Again, now you can leverage DataWorld to do a lot of these things, but eventually you're going to get to the point where you really need to spend some time kind of foundationally on data.
I love that service as a software. That's great. Because I have a hypothesis that over the next few years, end users are going to stop learning how to use new applications. No one wants to learn how to learn a new CRM or data catalog or whatever it is. They just want to chat with it and not care what's behind the scenes. And I love that, Rob.
But we were facing this glut of data. Is it too late to drive efficiency and hygiene with our metadata, or do we still have hope?
There's absolutely hope.
Okay, there's hope. Say more.
There's absolutely hope, and it's a lot of the work that we've been doing jointly over the last several years is kind of taking people down that path of one, it's not as painful as you think, right? It's hard and it'll be a challenge, and but it is not this existential crisis that a lot of people think it is. And I think sometimes you look at a problem like that and you're like, oh, we don't have the resources, we don't have the time, like, it's this huge undertaking, and it's not as hard as you think, right? I think it's I know that there's a big cultural piece of this outside of the technology where, policies and organizational structure, those are also difficult, but generally easier than trying to make these massive, technological changes in your business. Simple people and process changes can go a long way to starting to solve this problem, right? Giving people ownership in this, not just IT folks, but actual business or operation sides of the house need to have skin in the game and need to be a part of this. So there's absolutely hope. And I encourage everybody that's on the call and may hear this, that it is never too late to take the first step and start. And you'll quickly see the benefit of it if you do. So
Right. Sounds good. I think with the skin in the game analogy, it's a perfect segue to inviting our audience to offer up any questions they have for our panel here today. Audience? All right. Well,
Hopefully we don't get what is an ontology.
Right. You know what? We did it. Maybe I'll do some flashcards if we do. I'm more than happy to help us all out.
Right.
All right. So I'm not, Steph, just to let you know, I'm not seeing anything pop up in my view, but if there's something, just interrupt me. So I'll take us to this. Like, let's kind of summarize our discussion here, but let's summarize it from a practitioner's point of view. What are some practical first steps for companies just starting to think about their governance? And I'm putting us in governance before AI initiatives because I think we all heard loud and clear, you can do AI initiatives, but if you don't have your data and metadata and your governance in order, and I think everybody heard loud and clear too, ontology is the path to the future, then we've got work to do. So if we start at the beginning, we have to be able to understand and create unified meaning with our data, right, Rob?
Yeah, I think the starting at the beginning really is critical. And I'm going to go back to something Jake mentioned, which is cultural. It's also enterprise buy-in, right? So their AI initiatives oftentimes siloed in organizations, siloed off from each other, maybe different ones happening. But when you start to talk about bigger items like data governance, ontologies, et cetera, you have to kind of get executive buy-in and you have to really come to the table with an ROI. Like, we're going to do this because of this, right? You have to get the business buy-in.
Mhm.
All these things, take some time and some effort, money, et cetera, to build. There's a really good way that we like to help companies kind of get started or launch down that path. And it's just a rapid POC of like, hey, we can come in and basically 2 weeks and create an ontology for you and show you how it can benefit you and run an LLM over it, right? That will then enable that organization to take it up the chain, to get buy-in from executives, to get that sponsorship within an organization. So I think there's a little bit of showing organizations, executive level, the benefits of some of these really important topics to get their buy-in, to get their
Right.
budget approval, et cetera, to head down that path. So I would really focus on starting there.
Yep.
And like I said, I believe that's the beginning of it, really.
I love that. Invest in the ROI and predicted outcomes first. So you're just not on a path to nowhere, if you will,
Yeah.
of innovation.
Yeah, and I think we have a question in the chat, which I think is kind of where I was going to start. Is I think some of this
Yep.
stuff is a little daunting. So thank you for the question just around knowledge graph and ontology. Actual ontology files, how they get created, how you manage them. They're a daunting process, especially if you come to this and are not an engineer by trade. It gets really overwhelming to try and where do you start to create an ontology, right? Good news, there is a ton of tools. I know that there is some, internal data world related capability and features that allow a much easier way to integrate those ontologies and manage them. There's a handful of open source capabilities as well that allow you to load RDF or OWL files into the platform, and you kind of see this node and edge visual representation of the ontology and allows you to edit. Grapho is a really good example of a tool that does that. And we'd be happy to share all of these links and things with the folks afterwards. But yes, there's definitely ways. I 100% hear you on that. Me myself, not being an engineer by trade, was very difficult for me to try and when I was getting started here, trying to figure out, how can I do this myself, right? Is it even possible? Do I need to learn a new language in order to do this?
Right.
And the answer is no, right? I think you can. There's a lot of really cool tools out there. So, and we'll share some of that content with you. But just wanted to make sure we addressed that before we moved on.
And again, the reason we exist, Cyberhill, is we help companies figure that out with the great tools that Data World offers, right? So, it's a super powerful engine, right? And so you don't want to just get in it and hit the gas, right? You want some help trying to figure out how do we do this. But the good news is, and I think this is a super important point, is it's not overwhelming. It seems overwhelming maybe to some people today just talking about it and trying to ingest this information, but we can teach you quickly. Data World can teach you, so it's not a barrier to entry. It's something you can readily understand and learn. Once you start to see it, understand it, it moves pretty fast, and then you can start to take over and build and refine some of these things.
Fantastic. All right, panelists. Now it's time for our speed round. Are we ready as we close out our conversation today?
Let's do it.
Reminder, I've asked our three panelists to offer us 2 key takeaways from at large or our conversation today. Jake, let's start with you. Your key takeaways for the audience, please.
Yeah, I mentioned this a few times today, right?
Yep, keep going.
Which is it's culture, right? The success of an implementation of a piece of software or your strategy around AI, to me personally, comes down to change management, policies, and culture within your business, right? Everybody has to be involved in this change in order for it to be successful. From folks that are actually hands-on keyboard developing all the way up to leadership, there needs to be buy-in, understanding, and stakeholder engagement across the board in order for any of these things to be successful. So that's number one. The second thing is that we touched on some of the industries that Cyberhill supports, right? And one of the key takeaways that I've seen is look to regulated industries, right? Look to healthcare, to finance, finance, insurance. We touched on a little bit today. Look to the federal government, right? Department of Defense, the intelligence community. Those regulated industries, from our opinion, often become the gold standard of how things should be implemented, because you're under the microscope of those regulations and scrutiny. There is a lot of material out there. There's a lot of personal success that we've seen that we would love to share on how we've kind of, in very high pressure situations and environments, that we've seen a lot of growth and have kind of defined the way we think about implementation. So those are kind of the 2 big takeaways to me. But would love to hear what Rob and Ryan have to say.
Okay. Rob, would you like to go next?
Sure. So, we touched upon it. Traceability, I think, is paramount. It's important, and you need an ontology to do that. And I saw a question just come through. Are there industry-specific ontologies versus having to build one from scratch? So that's going to go to my second point, which is you want to certainly leverage industry-specific ontologies. They exist everywhere or a lot of places, but you do want to build and leverage off of your own, create something that's integrated to an industry. If you can create your own ontology, and again, you can do that very readily, you can create intellectual property, right? Every business is different. Lowe's is different than Home Depot, how they operate, how they measure things. United Airlines measures things differently than Delta, right? They all measure a common set of principles together, and that's where you can leverage an ontology that's industry specific. But at the end of the day, by developing and refining your own ontology, you can create your own intellectual property for your business. So traceability, important. Don't be afraid. Leverage existing industry ontologies. They exist, but don't be afraid to build your own. You need it in the future, and it does kind of create a competitive barrier. It creates an advantage for you, and I'll call it an intellectual property for you.
Very good advice. Okay, Ryan, your two takeaways, please.
Yeah, my first takeaway is one we've talked about a lot, which is that AI and metadata are inseparably linked. And I like the way at Gartner at their UK summit, they had a slide up there that I remember I took a picture of because I liked it, that said very simply, if you're going to be serious about AI, you need to get serious about metadata. And as we've talked about, the best way to do that is to store your metadata in a knowledge graph so that you're building business context into that metadata, which can then be used to power your AI. So that one we've covered quite a bit. I guess the other one I would say is that, there's a lot of talk right now around AI governance. And AI governance isn't really a whole new thing. It can be accomplished using the tools that a lot of companies already have, because it's really just an extension to data governance and follow some of the same patterns. So data governance, you're governing your business concepts and assets like, databases and tables and columns and schemas and reports and dashboards, things like that. Well, if you have the right flexibility in your platform, you can model not just those, but you can govern things like the AI models themselves, and where are they being used and by whom and for what domains. You can govern the lineage of how are these models feeding each other, what data is being used for training, what data is used at runtime, like where are the outputs going. You can model the life cycles of these things, and so you can really catalog and govern your AI using the same patterns that you're using for your data.
Thank you. Well, audience, I think it's very clear that our panelists are very passionate practitioners in this space. Thank you all for joining us today on our conversation with governance for AI. My key takeaway is that it's not too late to start. Starting today is far better than starting tomorrow. Thank you to Steph and the extended production team for allowing us to join you all today. Everybody have a great rest of the week. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.